Well, last night I spoke about optimism and why I insist on being optimistic in this pessimistic and even cynical age. Optimism, I argued and believed, is a stance, it's a choice, a way of living in the world, and a kind of resistance to the slide toward pessimism and despondency. This morning, I want to reflect less about my fundamental orientation than about the way I have gotten there, the impulses through which I have arrived at a kind of insistent optimism. This morning, I want to talk about desire, about wanting things that will enrich our lives. I want to talk this morning about yearning. And so I'm going to say something about my own education, about those who have taught me, both in the classroom and on the playground, and about the lifelong paths on which our education can place us. But ultimately, my topic this morning is not how to learn, but how to live. And so I begin with a simple and I think provocative statement that the primary goal of education is to inflame desire and to generate aspiration. The poet Robert Frost captures in his own distinctive voice what I mean. And here's what Frost says. There are two kinds of teachers. The kind that fills you with so much quail shot that you can't move. And the kind of teacher who just gives you a little prod and you jump to the skies. What then is that little prod, which turns out to be so much bigger than little and so consequential? I think that I was awakened to the power of desire by something I experienced not in a classroom, but on the playground of my elementary school, Moreland School, when I was just beginning the second grade. I was then 7 years old. That was a long time ago, to be sure, but I have never forgotten this experience. I was talking to a friend who was 1 year older than I was and who was just entering the third grade. And soon our casual playground conversation turned to the subject of writing papers for our teachers. I was telling him that our teacher in the second grade had recently told us how to format our papers. To put the title, many of you will remember this, to put the title in the middle of the top line, and then to place our name at the left margin of the second line, and the date way over at the right margin of that same second line. It's well-spaced, easy enough to do. At this point, the third grader said to me, in hushed tones, at least as I remember them, that, and here I think I can quote this third grade friend of mine verbatim, when you get to the third grade, you have to put all that information, name, date, and title, together in the upper right-hand corner of the page. And I remember quite vividly my reaction to this stunning piece of information. How am I ever going to be able to do that? And then how am I ever going to be able to get through the third grade if this is the kind of thing I'm going to have to do? But I also remember my very next thought. This is something that I want to be able to do. And how exciting it would be to be able to climb this mountain. Third grade is going to be scary, I thought, but it's also going to be exciting. And at that moment, desire entered my life. The desire to know, the desire to understand, to master certain tasks, to feel the exhilaration of discovery and self-discovery. The power of enchantment at that moment entered my life, and enhanced by the power of memory, I am sure, that moment felt to me, as I remember it, like a sunrise. That is why I remember it so vividly. I was lucky. Among the many other blessings in my life, I had the good fortune to have inspiring teachers throughout the years of my education. Teachers who inflamed desires in me, desires that, I must admit, have not yet diminished. And so I'm going to tell you about two of my many memorable teachers, both at Shaker Heights High School. Teachers that I was lucky to have, my math teacher and my baseball coach. First, my math teacher at Shaker, Jim Bristol. Now, Mr. Bristol, and we never, ever would have dared to call him Jim, Mr. Bristol was all motion and energy. He had the capacity to speak faster than anyone I have ever met. In addition, he had the uncanny ability to write proofs on the blackboard as fast as he spoke. And when he had filled the blackboard, but still he had so much more to say, he would rush back to the other end of the blackboard and continue on, this time erasing the board with one hand while writing with the other. His middle name must have been Enthusiasm, because bubbling over, he couldn't wait to explain something elegant to us. The experience of watching this performance was for all of us dazzling. In a word, Mr. Bristol was filled with love, a huge love that took on many forms. He loved mathematics, to be sure. In addition, he loved his daily opportunity to express his passion for math. But most of all, he loved us, his students. And by loving us, he wanted the best for us. And what was the best? The joy of mathematics. And the force of this love of his created in us the desire for mathematics, the mathematics he loved so fully and so authentically. And though I am no mathematician in any real sense of the word, I've always loved math and always felt a special passion for it. This is what he did for me. And so just the other day, I picked up a primer on calculus to brush up on my long atrophied skills. It was Jim Bristol of blessed memory who instilled in me the love of math and the desire to know more and to know better what I do know. Love inflames desire, which in turn inflames more love. And then there's my high school baseball coach, Fred Heinlein. Some of you probably know that name. Fred, again, not that we would have ever dared to call him Fred, except behind his back. Mr. Heinlein taught us how to aspire for excellence, which I want to make very clear is very different from being excellent. Fred Heinlein understood baseball inside and out. And he wanted us, his charges, to understand it too. Understand it in our heads, to be sure, but also in our bones and with cultivated instincts, so that playing the right way became second nature to us. hustling hard all the time, never taking anything for granted, trying without being foolish to take the extra base, to know on defense in advance of every pitch what you are going to do if the ball should happen to be hit to you. He called this thinking as if it's going to be hit to me. And always, always supporting your teammates, wanting to play the game the right way, wanting to do better and better, wanting. This is what Fred Heinlein imparted to us. And though perfection will always elude us, I offer this proposition for your consideration. Wanting perfection enriches your life. And the games we play and the yearnings we deploy through them also teach us how to live our lives off the fields of athletic competition. What the great and greatly lamented author who wrote beautifully on baseball for 50, 60 years, Roger Angell, this is what Roger Angell said about baseball, and that he thought applies to all endeavors, whether on the athletic fields or in the studio or on the theater stage. And here's what he said. Truly, baseball is not life itself, although the resemblance keeps coming up. And I remember a magical night during my first year at college. It happens that a professor of the Old Testament, this is what everyone called the Hebrew Scriptures back then, that a professor whose name was Robin Scroggs told us early in the semester to go home tonight and to read the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. Now, up to that point, I had never read the Bible before. But from my years in Sunday school, I knew something of its contents. And so that night around 7 o'clock and right after dinner, I went to the library to read the book of Genesis. And as I read, gradually I felt something powerful emerging from that text, a certain illumination which began to overwhelm me. And this power, this light, seemed to call out to me, drew me further and further into the narrative and its protagonists, and made me want more. And so I read on, and I have been reading on to this very day. And that moment, I believe, that moment in the Baker Library, totally unknown to me in advance, without beckoning me at all before I started reading. That moment, I believe, was the beginning of my thoughts of becoming a rabbi. Wanting more, learning to cultivate desire, that's one of the keys to living an exciting life. And we find these flames of desire everywhere in our Jewish texts. Listen to the psalmist as he or she expresses a desire for God in evocative language, Psalm 42. Like a hind crying for water, my soul cries for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Oh, when will I come to appear before God? Or listen to the prophet Micah, yearning to discover what God wants from him. What in life is of surpassing and lasting value? What he ought to aspire to embody in his life? On what path shall he now go down? Prophet Micah chapter 6. With what shall I approach the Lord? Do homage to God on high. Shall I approach him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with myriads of streams of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for my sins. He has told you, O human being, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. This for Micah is the proper goal of our deepest and most lasting aspirations, to search for a dispassionate justice that indulges no fear nor favor, but to complement this necessary dispassion as a social good with a warm-hearted compassion that considers the situation and needs of particular individuals, and then to strive for, and here is a kind of paradox, to strive mightily for humility, to make a huge, huge, huge effort to be small. A humility that results from insights into my littleness in the vastness of all things. Micah yearns for three things that do not easily sit together: something huge, justice and mercy, and something humbling, a recognition of who I am. Micah's aspirations are enormous, beckoning, and never fully realized. Wanting more insight, more intimacy, more meaning, wanting something of value, and devoting our energy to obtaining it. This is one of the things that gives our lives its verve, its significance, its reach, its value. And though my high school Latin teacher, Evelyn Dilley, died more than 60 years ago, I never stop hearing her words to us, quoting the poet Robert Browning. Ah, but a person's reach should always exceed his or her grasp, or what's a heaven for? Lifelong, never-ending, always energizing yearning. That, it seems to me, is one of the ways to live a life of blessing, of fulfillment, and of joy. Amen.